is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hi guys, I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, here with Dr. Kori Propst, our health psychologist. I always say your name like that, I've noticed. I like raise an octave at the end of your name. Kori Propst. And today we are in part 2 of our creativity series, which I'm just having a blast with, Kori, and want to get into the heart of the matter, at least for me, which is the work of creativity. And I know that sounds antithetical. Creativity is supposed to be fun and spontaneous, but it's absolutely not. And so I want to talk about that. So as soon as I say that, what comes to mind for you, that creativity actually takes some effort?
I agree with you, and I would say that creativity can come in times when you are having fun and you're playing, and I don't want to use the word relaxing, but there is some part of that, and you're letting things just come at you. And there's moments of very intense focus and deliberate intensity. But you can play deliberately too. Mm-hmm. So that's immediately what came to my mind, Joe.
Well, I wasn't going to mention this, but you made this kind of surface in my brain. A great point about it coming while playing. Brain waves are generated and can be measured. So we have alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves. Mm-hmm. Probably news to some people is that in an alpha wave state, which is when you're very relaxed, is when most of your creative thought comes, because the part of your frontal cortex that's kind of on guard, watching and assimilating everything, that's quiet, and the rest of your brain is more integrated. And so this is really funny, because I've always said some of my best ideas come when I'm on the treadmill or I'm working out. I carry a notebook to my workouts because that's when I have the best ideas. Mm-hmm. And that's very normal, because that's when all of that happens. You're in an alpha state when you're doing something very repetitive and mundane, and it gives your brain that chill time.
Yeah. So, I'm thinking about my ideas coming to me when I'm in the shower. I'm doing something repetitive and rhythmic. Ideas come to me when I'm on my bike. That's very, very repetitive and rhythmic in many regards. That when I'm running, definitely those are at the same time, I could be sitting at my desk feeling like I'm stuck in quicksand and nothing is moving or flowing. And I could have a moment where it can feel like all of a sudden I'm struck with an idea that I haven't had before.
Yeah, ideas and creativity can come many times in many forms, many different ways, but you can also get yourself in an environment and a state where it's just easier and more conducive. And I want to tell you a story. So I was recently in a creative writing workshop at an actual university residency, and in a workshop, the instructor gives us this prompt, and we're supposed to write down the last time you were scared, like the worst you've ever been scared. So a lot of people are reading these things that are kind of scary. They're horror type content. Mm-hmm. And I wrote something that was very internal. Mm-hmm. And when I read mine, very short prompt, one of the instructors, who's a good friend of mine, she just bursts into tears. Another guy who is a great writer, poet, has a PhD in writing, his face just went blank, his eyebrows raised, and he just said, wow. Mm-hmm. And here's what's funny about that. I was writing a scene. So this just popped up in my mind, right? That moment of inspiration, but not really, because I'm in a writing workshop with a writing instructor doing a writing prompt. Right. So my mind is already fertile for this kind of activity. Mm-hmm. But what came to my mind was a scene that I did not write for a creative nonfiction book that I finished 3 years ago. And I started writing it 5 years ago. So here's this work that's been in my brain. It's been simmering, jumbling around. I plan on seeking a publisher for that in a couple years. But it's still there, right? It's percolating. It's always been there. I still occasionally write notes. I'll get some ideas and I'm putting notes down for this book. But this scene was way more graphic, way more vivid, and so raw that my friend, the instructor, said, "You got to turn that into a novel." And I said, "Well, it's really part of a nonfiction piece." She said, No, that's a novel. That's a freaking novel. And my other friend agreed. And so we talked about that. So here are my points. Number one, there is that foundational just formation time that you can create the environment for. I was in a place where we're supposed to be there to create. So that's important. But to my point that creativity is work, this is a project that's been going on for 5 years, and creativity can be improved upon. You might have a great idea. You think this is amazing, but give it time, let it generate, let it mature, add stuff to it, and you could have something even far better. So what do you think about that so far?
Well, I'm thinking about all the authors that I've heard talk about how they've written a book, it's been published, and they're still thinking about that book and the plot and how it could be better and how it could be improved upon. So that really makes a lot of sense to me. And the deliberate part about it is that you think through and plan, like you carry a notebook with you. That's a planned discipline of yours because you understand that that is going to help promote creativity. And then you were in this environment, you went there willingly, thinking deliberately, consciously, I'm going to be in a place where this is going to be promotional of creativity. So yeah, I love that.
And all of this comes down to the fact that this discipline, as you called it, and the habit of being in tune for creativity, looking for creativity, trying to build creativity is very important for our businesses. That's the topic today. And you and I often discuss how, hey, we need to solve this problem in our business, or this is what we see in the industry at large. I think everybody's missing something, and we may not even have the answer. So let's put this on the top of the list for us to think about and try and germinate something. So again, it's not just a flash of brilliance. It takes work, and it takes a shrewd eye of knowing your industry, knowing your business, knowing the culture, to start looking for the best ideas that some people may not even have considered there to be a question for yet.
Right. So would you say, Joe, that maybe one of the best questions that we could begin asking ourselves as fitness entrepreneurs, if we're wanting to be creative, is where are the gaps? Because creativity is novelty. It's what areas are not being addressed that need to be addressed. And maybe part of that is really drilling down into what are my clients needing? What do they keep bringing up over and over again, repeatedly, that some need isn't getting met? And how might I do that in a way that I've not done before or that other people aren't doing?
Yeah, this is one of the coolest things about creativity to me, is that there's a point from which you have to grow out of a base that already exists. We have to have a universality of acceptance, or people won't even recognize it. The cliche, he or she was so far ahead of their time, like the entire world didn't even recognize their genius until a generation later. Well, that does no good for that person in the moment because they weren't close enough to the need. So here's what I love to do. I mentioned in the first episode of this series that, why didn't somebody 50,000 years ago or even 200 years ago just instantly build the space station? Like, oh, that idea just popped in my head. Because we have to build on what we know. So even in like cell phones, the iPhone 10, well, that took somebody discovering the fact that we can communicate via a phone line and then digitally, blah, 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 and all this. And so Yeah, it's a gradual evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to say the first point might be to look at the gaps at what people are missing, that will probably give you that next step that maybe a lot of people are thinking. But when you can cross-pollinate different parts of culture or look at other industries, you'll often have something that looks very novel, just because your scope was way broader than just looking at a problem in your industry by your business niche within your skill set.
Right. Here's a very small example. I remember doing a talk in a class with my clients on environmental engineering. Now, that doesn't sound like it's going to be about nutrition or fitness at all, but I did exactly what you said. It's an integration of other contexts and areas, and there's a novelty about it. Environmental engineering. I'm an engineer of my environment. I'm working on a nutritional goal. Yeah, you are. And here's how it's going to be done. So I like that you mentioned, like, go out to other industries and start thinking about how they're doing things a little bit differently and meeting client needs and demands, and how you might integrate that into your business.
Absolutely. And another key thing is, you're looking to solve a problem, which is to your point about there being a gap. But another thing is to look at, maybe we're not even conceiving of a problem. We're looking ahead at where problems might be. And to get that audience to listen to you takes some provocation. So, the reason my scene had some impact, to the point that my friend said, hey, I know you're going to be gone for the rest of this residency, but she made me promise that I would finish that scene and let her read it at a flash fiction event. And the reason she was so invested in that is because it was so provocative. It wasn't normal. There was some real intensity in that. And in a marketing sense, or getting people to listen to your ideas and why should I listen to this? Why should I be interested? It's got to be on the edge. It has to be where people can't live without it. That's a big part of creativity, is you need to solve a problem to the point where people absolutely need it.
So I'm thinking potential clients, individuals may be like, that's interesting, or ooh, that hits me in a weird place. I'm thinking of, because I read your manuscript, and what I said was that, wow, people are going to want to be a voyeur into this person's life. Yeah.
So part of that is, you also said, a lot of people feel this way. It's one of those things we don't talk about, but a lot of people are going to be right there with you.
Well, that's it. No, you're exactly right. Not very many people talk about it because it's very private and painful. And yet everyone wants to know that they're not the only one experiencing it. Yeah.
So I wish I had this book ready to sell, because I think we're doing a good job, like, building the anticipation.
Right.
But so that's an interesting thing. Let's talk about this. There is actual data that describes the fact that you need a certain amount of understanding and universality. People know what you're talking about, but then it has to be new. And in the writing world, it's been said like this, like, it's got to be new, but it's got to be the same. It's got to be the same, but it's got to be different. And there are different ways of describing that, but it really comes down to, and this was written about recently in a book called The Creative Curve by a guy who owns a data collection company. Like, he looks at metrics and analytics all day long. And he said, for anything that's ever succeeded in culture, whether it's a book or a band or a business, they hit a point where everybody is ready to accept this. It's not a hard jump. It's not a leap of faith to understand it, but there is some novelty to it that just pulls it over the edge. And so when you're looking at a next step for your business when you're thinking, okay, what is everybody else doing, and I need to do something else. You know, they're zigging, I need to zag. You gotta think of where the culture is and what they're willing to do, but then, like you said, solve that next problem in an incredibly unique way.
So we really want to capitalize on what they already value, but maybe not even that they recognize they value, but subconsciously they value. Like these very intense emotions that your manuscript is going to bring up. We know that people value emotion because they're human. They don't like it a lot of times because it's unpleasant, but they value it because they're human. It's subconscious. So, right. Okay.
And a lot of times it really comes down to something so practical. You know, we might be thinking way out there in the periphery of our brain and what can I do that's just out of this world? But it can be solving something. I always go back to the example of Uber. I'm in a company, like cabs are hard to get, right? If you're just a couple streets off the main beaten path, or it's a weird time of night, it's tough. But when you can just, you know, put in an address and you got a ride coming instantly, talk about solving a problem that you never even knew you had. But now, you know, who doesn't use that? It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right. Yeah.
So I think in terms of main points for today is understanding that creativity takes some effort. Don't just think that, well, I'm not skilled, I don't have good ideas. Here's an interesting stat. I heard this on a TED Talk. When you ask kindergartners or first graders, you know, who in here thinks they're creative? More than 90% of kids say, I'm creative. And then when you ask high schoolers, you know, who in here is creative? Less than 5% say I'm creative. So in that short of period of time, the pecking order of culture beats it out of you that you have anything worthwhile to say. And I think it's because we expect that these ideas are just going to happen. And if you don't have the best idea in the world, you're not a very creative person.
Creative or smart or
right.
A number of things. Yeah.
So understand that you can be, and what we talked about in the first episode is that you need content, and you can't build new things without the old things there to build upon. So you need tons of constant stimulation, meaning, you know, books, YouTube videos, just anything. You mentioned yesterday, even cross, you know, cultural, bringing in a broad spectrum of ideas.
Yeah. On a very practical note, I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I know that these other podcasters are listening to a lot of podcasts as well. And they're interviewing a lot of people and reading a lot of books. And they come across as very creative and very intelligent. I wonder why. Because they're amassing a ton of information and absorbing that, and with that information they're able to bring more novelty to the actual interviews that they're doing with these people. So
let me close this down with this, and then we'll end this series in our next episode with a list of very practical steps that you need to foster an entire life of growing creativity, because creativity is a skill that you can practice and build, so these ideas come faster. You recognize the good ones, you can build on them. But was reading some information about art. I recently went to Italy, as you know, and just amazed. I mean, you're walking through all these cathedrals and places, and of course, this is where Michelangelo was and Da Vinci, and it was amazing to learn that for that 1,000-year period of time, the reason people created art was to convincingly tell a story. So that's where you have things like the Sistine Chapel, the Last Supper, things like that. They had this agenda of proving Christianity to be real and right. And so they spent 1,000 years cementing it into their culture so that you couldn't escape it. And that's another part of creativity in business, is to, when you have that idea that you think is a winner, then you need to be pretty dogmatic about wrapping it up in a story or an art form. And I mean that broadly. Art in terms of, it's not just, hey, I had this idea, here it is, world. You got to present it in a way that provokes emotion.
Sure.
Through all the senses. So that's you got to be creative with your creativity in how you're going to present it to the world. So let's do this. Let's work on that list, Kori, and we'll present that in the next episode, and we'll just kind of tie this all up in a 3-part series on creativity. But appreciate you jumping in there with me and letting me do that. Of course, I wanted to do this on the heels of that conference I was just at, because it's just teaming up to the surface for me.
That's great. Yeah, and there's a lot of studies and research out there in terms of what promotes creativity and how you can structure your environment in a way that can help you facilitate it too. So maybe we can dig into that tomorrow as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
All right, guys. And again, appreciate you watching and listening. And we're going to bring this last episode to you next time and be off to some more macro stuff and motivational mastery. So stay tuned.
Thanks, guys.